Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Sparkle on Substack, the podcast with me, Claire Venus. I'm so delighted to have my friend Emma Simpson with me today. And it's such a beautiful little love story, mine and Emma's story. So we met via my friend Susie Walker's writing group, Heartleap. That's how we first encountered each other. And that was probably about a year ago, I want to say, Emma. I think maybe we sort of were aware of each other around about then. And we have deepened our colleagueship, our kinship, our friendship, and I class Emma as one of my friends now, which is a beautiful thing to say. We met on Substack. So welcome, Emma. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks, Claire. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, it's one of those things that when I talk about Substack, I say like I've met real friends and not just, we've met in person, you've stayed at my house, I've met up with you and Anik, it's really special. So yeah, hi, I'm Emma Simpson. I am a writer. My first book is due for publication in March 2025, and we'll talk about that as we go through the podcast. And I write a publication on Substack called Lemon Soul. And as Claire says, we met through Susie Walker's Heartleap Writing Hour, which is a really special place and one of the things that makes Substack really what it is and how you find those genuine and authentic connections. So thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. And I've been so excited to record with you. I feel like I would have recorded anytime. I feel like we could talk for like hours anyway, and we have talked for hours. But we wanted to try and bring in this experience of you when I first met you. You had written this book, and I think you were on the way to it being represented. I don't think when we first met it was represented. And so this was so exciting to me. There was somebody in the writing group that was not only writing a book, but was on this mission, to like, okay, this is going to be a book that's out in the world. However that happens, it's going to happen. And then within this, for the time I've known you, this year-long trajectory, there's now a pre-order link. We can pre-order it and it will arrive in March next year, which I just find phenomenal. That's all happened in the time. And I know publishing timelines can be longer than they seem and all that sort of stuff. So I love to get into that. But take us back a little bit, Emma. You started writing this book and you were deciding what it was going to be, what the structure was going to be. You were called to write about wild swimming. Like, tell us about all of that. How did that all come to be?
So the book started, it was quite funny because I wasn't a writer previously, and I'm writing something on Substack about this today about, what you sort of do and don't need to have been or be. I didn't have any background in writing or journalism or anything like that. I was an air traffic controller for 20 years. I had a very non-literary career. And I had to come out of that about 4 years ago for health reasons. And I'd always had a love for writing. I wouldn't even say, oh, I'd always had a book in me, but I'd always really enjoyed writing. I would do travel journaling. And I used to write children's poetry a lot. Like even before I had kids, I've got this whole world of children's poetry that just sits in my cupboard, which I just really, really enjoyed. And after I had to change careers, one of the things that I had been doing alongside that for quite some time was open water swimming. And I think it was this different passions of mine collided. So there was the open water swimming, there was the community that I met there, and lots of women that I met around the lake where I swim. And I love hearing people's stories. So my sort of thing, I realized it was all about storytelling. And then I just found that I really, really enjoyed the writing. And I met a group of women down at the lake where I swim who were about to swim the English Channel as a relay. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. What an incredible thing. Asked if they might share their stories with me, if I could kind of come along to some of their training with them, understand a bit more about the process. So the book started being about that. And then it was 2020. So then lockdown happened, and actually, obviously, everything changed. But what that meant was I wasn't then able to meet up with people in person or swim at the lake or continue necessarily following those stories. But what did unexpectedly happen then is I got put in touch with women online because we all went online from around the world. And I ended up interviewing women from Fiji to Finland to Canada to Africa about, and it evolved from not being about swimming to about really what water means to them, about their relationship with the open water, about what being in that natural environment does for them. So then it just kind of morphed and expanded into this really beautiful collection of stories around how we navigate the ebb and flow of life as women.
It's just so gorgeous. I mean, obviously, like I've heard little snippets, you've put bits on your Substack, and I feel like I know the book so well. You've
Mhm.
actually sent me a proof copy, so I'm so delighted and honored to be able to be reading that. So I've just started that process, so I'm so excited to share more. So When you first started, and obviously there's a huge breadth of different stories there from people all over the world, did you have an idea of how you were going to kind of structure the book and how long you wanted it to be, or were you just kind of following your nose and going with the stories when it all first started?
When it first started, it was just really gathering the stories. And the way that I did that as well is I didn't do it with any sort of journalistic or academic kind of methodology. It was very much like soul stories. It's like, tell me your story. Let's talk
Mm.
like this. Let me listen to you. Let me understand you. And then let me go and swill that around and come back in a couple of days' time and sort of write what stuck out to me for that. Like, one of the women I speak to, and I talk about this particular bit quite a lot, but she's a multiple world record holding marathon swimmer who has swum around Manhattan Island 4 times consecutively and done ice miles in every continent in the world. So swam a mile in water under 5 degrees with only a swimsuit on. And she's really extraordinary. And when I was asking her like about her achievements and things, she didn't talk about. Oh, well, no, I said to her, "What was some of your most profound moments and memories?" And she said, "Oh, it wasn't anything about the records or anything like that, but it was about the taste of an iceberg." So as she was swimming in the Antarctic, tasting the fact that the salt water was meeting this really cold, fresh, melting ice water, and the experience of that, but also then the bigger significance of that and what that means. But as her and I began chatting, more and more things came out. It was a bit like holding people in the moment. And then she shared with me some really heartbreaking stories about her father who had died during as a result of 9/11. He was a New York police detective, and how when she swims in Manhattan Island, she gets into the water by the New York detectives, New York Police Memorial. So, it just kind of went into the fact that we're connecting through this experience on the bigger themes of life. It's not just about the experience of getting into the water. And so as I started to structure it, I guess I had all these stories and I got an agent. I say that really casually, like I got an agent, but we can talk about that in a minute. But I did get an agent really quite quickly. Um, and when I met the head of the agency, um, so the agent I was assigned to was a new agent, and she said, "Right, well, come and meet the head of the agency." And he said, "Yeah, your writing's lovely and all that, but what's the book all about?" And I said, "Oh, well, it's women in water and stories from all around the world and how we experience this and how we navigate this and that and the other." And he was like, "Yeah, that's all very beautiful, but what's it actually about? What's it about? Why am I interested? What's going to make me want to read the next chapter? And what are you kind of this thing like, what are you promising the reader? What journey are you taking them from the beginning to the end?" And I was just like, "Oh, well, women." And I was really floundering and nervous. And we were up in the Ivy in London, and I was kind of crapping myself, just thinking, "Oh
Yeah,
God, are they going to..."
oh, no pressure. I'm just in the ivy.
I know it was surreal. I was just like, "Oh my God, this is me who's never done anything like this before." And this guy is quizzing me about what the book's
It's a
about.
big meeting if you're going to
It
meet
was
in
a
the ivy. That's a big meeting. Yeah.
big meeting,
Yeah.
and I was sort of blathering on about women and water and nature. And anyway, he was just, you could tell, and you tell when someone's getting a bit bored of you, and he was just like, "Okay, I get that, but what's it all about? What's it actually all about?" And then I just sort of took a deep breath and said, "Okay, it's all about my brother's death." And I sort of said it's about the moment when my life was ripped in two in our 30s when he died through quite tragically through hospital malpractice. And it was very sudden. And I said, it's about that. It's about the moment when my life ripped in two and where it was before and where it was after, and how how the open water was a vehicle for me in helping me absorb and confront my grief and work through and process that and what it's done for me afterwards. And he went, "Yeah, that's it. That's the book. That's it. What we want to know is what brought you to the open water. Did you survive? What's it done for you? I mean, obviously you survived because you've written the book, but what was that journey like? How did you get from there to there? And how did the people you've met, you know, get, how has it become part of their stories?" So instead of it being like a collection of essays, that's when it started to become, the narrative arc started to really form.
Yeah, yeah, it's so beautiful, Emma, to hear you talk about that. And I did know a little piece of that story already. And I think it can really help us, can't it, to push ourselves in that direction, even with a Substack piece. What is this piece really about? What journey am I hoping to take my reader on? What do I want them to take away from this? Is it one thing? Is it 10 things? How do I want them to feel? So I'm really into that somatic stuff. So my husband's a yoga teacher and
Mm.
wellness coach, and he's been cold water swimming for years. So he would do beach yoga and then get in the sea. So they would all get in the sea and they'd just be in the sea. And I would never get in the sea. So I can remember it was a boiling hot summer's day on the Northumberland beach that he teaches on. And I thought to myself, if I don't get in now, I'm probably never ever going to get in, but I'm not getting in. And like everybody around was like, come on, Claire, we're all going in. You'll really enjoy it. It's this, it's that. And I was like, I just can't. And then this year, so obviously 2024, I've been in the sea. I went in with a couple of pals, influenced by you talking about the healing properties of immersing yourself in water. And honestly, it's very, very difficult to describe how I felt and how I experienced myself in the world that day, but it was profoundly healing. I wasn't necessarily expecting anything. I just knew I was really called to do it. I wanted to shift because of grief. I wanted to shift how I was feeling and just almost like unravel some of that in the water. Like, so that was
Yeah.
my kind of intention. Like, whatever happens, I don't want to carry this anymore. Like, I'm going to give it to the water. And so that's what happened, and a piece of poetry flowed out. So it's interesting you should mention writing children's poems. A piece of poetry flowed out. I shared it on my Substack on Creatively Conscious. I shared a photo, like just a candid photo of me and the two women I swam with. And it's a memory that will stay with me for the rest of my life. There's
Yeah.
something about the commitment to doing the thing, the people that are there with you, and the elation of being submerged in the landscape. I think it's to do with that. It's to do with the fact of like looking back at the beach. And I remember my friend Caro's daughters were on the beach and they were playing, and I could see myself in them. I could see a younger version of myself in them, but I was in the water with my pals, feeling completely free and just very pleased with myself, given it had taken me like 9 years we've lived here. So 9 years to get in
Yeah.
the sea. It was
Well, yeah, and you
beautiful.
should be pleased with yourself. I mean, the beaches up where you live in Northumberland are extraordinary, but it's cold as well, and it's wild, obviously. And so it
Mm-hmm.
takes bravery, it takes a real courage to go in there. And there's a real sense of surrendering. And I think it's surrendering, in the physical sense, but it's also a huge surrendering in the mental sense and allowing yourself to kind of have that mental release, which is something I find so acute. I swim when I'm happy, I swim when I'm sad, I swim when I'm stuck, I swim when I go down there, I've got chronic health conditions, I go down there when I can barely get out of bed and my husband will drive me down there because I can't drive when I get into the water and I just float. Sometimes I'm not able to swim, but there's just something all encompassing about being in it. And it's that feeling of kind of, it's a real juxtaposition of safety and danger and risk and reward and all those kind of things that kind of takes us to the edges of what it means to be human, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think feeling really alive and that feeling of what that is possible in cold water. That's what I felt. I'm like, I feel alive in a way that I've not felt. Like, that's what I felt. Like, it's like I'm alive, I'm living, I'm breathing, and this is the world that I'm in. Yeah, it's really,
Yeah.
really special. And I can't wait to read some of the other stories of what has called women to start swimming, but also to continue. Because for me, it was a one-off, right? So I'm not being called to do any more. Not to say that I won't, but it was like a real purposeful, intentionful. I really want to go and give some of this grief to the sea because I can't carry it anymore.
Yeah.
So it was cathartic. And then yeah, I feel like it's almost like in my toolbox. Like if I have a really bad time, I just go and throw myself in the sea again. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I think that's a really important point that you make, actually, being called to do it once and maybe not again, because I went down to Devon to the Appledore Book Festival this weekend. And my
Yeah.
sister-in-law came into a sea pool with me, and she was like, "Oh my God, all those things you describe, exhilarating, amazing, And I was like, "Oh yay, somebody who's found it." And then she went home and she was like, "Yeah, it was brilliant. I don't think I'll do it again." And I was like, "Oh, that's really interesting." Um, but that's the thing. There's been such a kind of explosion in the proliferation of open water swimming. And I think the downside of that is that people might think, oh, I'm not one of those people now, or that's a group, or you've got to understand it, or you've got to have one of those massive coats that people wear, or you've got to have fluffy hats and all this stuff. It's like, no, nothing has changed from when I did it before lockdown, from before people were doing it everywhere in any sort of available puddle. It still has the same thing at the heart. And there's no expectation, and you can take it or you can leave it. And, one of the women I interviewed, who was the founder of the Blue Tits Chill Swimmers, which is one of the biggest community organizations around swimming in the country and growing globally. They're incredible. Like, everywhere you go in the UK, you can look them up and there will be a community you can swim with, so that you make sure you're not alone and that you're safe, because you've also got to, you know, my air traffic brain, you've also got to stay safe and don't swim if you don't swim in the sea if you don't understand the currents and things like that, and make sure places you go are safe for your own personal risk. But yeah, she talked about a woman that hadn't been out of her house for a couple of years for various reasons, a lot of mental health stuff. And even though she didn't swim, she would just come down with the group and light the fire. And it was the act of getting out and getting out of the house. So, you know, it's not to say it has to be done this way, or you have to suddenly be, you know, doing some big event or being all around with a big group. You can go on your own with, you know, in the safe circumstances. You can go with people, you can go with strangers, you can go with friends. You don't have to, it's not too late. You know, it's not like the boat has sailed on open water swimming because everyone's been going on about it for the last couple of years. It's back to the personal for me and the individual, and really kind of intense elemental connection. And you know, even though my brother who died and my dad who also died would never have set foot in cold water, and we weren't, you know, we weren't a family that for which that was a feature. I feel so deeply connected to them in a way that is really hard to describe, because I think in the moments, particularly in cold water, it's back to kind of the visceral bodily experience of the self, or whether I look up and look at the clouds. But I feel really just universally connected. It's really hard to
Mm.
describe. And there's something
Mhm.
so, so special about that for me.
Yeah, I love that. And I know I've told you about my friend Chloe before. So Chloe is an artist on the Northumberland Coast who did a beautiful performance art piece a couple of years ago now. It was situated in a lovely hut, and you went inside and you experienced her in the sea, and it was about the sea and grief. Her brother died at sea. And experiencing that and talking to Chloe and understanding more about her connection to the water and how it's helped her process grief, it was like, this feels familiar. Like, I get this, like there's something in that, you know. And then obviously being called to do that myself, to process my own grief, I think there's something that it's 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 beautifully simplistic, you know. Like, it's like when you're feeling there's all of this enormity of human emotion or human experience, or whether you feel like you've maybe just turned yourself into a slight robot, which I sometimes get that sometimes, you know, because working online is so fast paced, and you know the laptop is just never ending. Dave will say to me, you know, if you send an email you're going to get at least one back. And I'm like, yeah, it is that, you know. So the unplug, you know, the great big unplug, however we do that, whether that's a dog walk or whether we're meeting friends, to reconnect with ourselves, but also if there are other people who are experiencing that and we can be open and vulnerable with. My friend Hannah met her current partner through Dip Club. So Dip Club is like a northeast dip club at the sea at Tynemouth, I think they do it, or Whitley Bay. And they met through doing that. So I think they're coming up a year, which I think is very, very cute. So yeah, there's just all sorts of possibility, isn't there, by just opening ourselves up to understanding the stories of people and water. And I'm really excited that we get to go a bit deeper with that. You've taken us around the world to meet people in your book. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
And I wanted to circle into your Substack, Emma. So I've realized I'm not really that aware now because timelines get kind of fuzzy. How long you've been writing on Substack and what called you to write on Substack? Was it the fact that you were researching and writing this book? Was it something else? I'd love to know.
So I've been on there about a year and 3 months now. Started off, I don't trying to think what called me. You know, you sort of started to hear about it and read about it, and journalists might mention it, or you know, an author maybe I followed on Instagram. I think actually it was probably Instagram. You know, people like Emma Gannon and people who sort of were like, oh, now my writing's moving to Substack. And at the time, I was just like, oh, right, okay, well, I'm not going to get involved in that. Like years ago, someone had said to me, oh, you should write on Medium. And I had a look at it and I was like, oh, I mean, not to disrespect Medium, different things work for different people, but
Mm.
I just thought, oh, that's not for me. I don't know. I just sort of thought I can't cope with another platform. I can't cope with another thing. But then I suppose it was just like lots of little things in my periphery were talking about Substack. And so I just went on there without knowing anything and realized how easy it was. I think that is the joy of Substack, because I have a WordPress blog on my website, but if you go on my website, obviously there's not really anything on it, because it's just, even though WordPress isn't that complicated, it kind of is. And so going in there and having to reteach myself WordPress every time means that I write the things, but they don't see the light of day. So with Substack, it was just amazing because I went on and I wrote my first thing, and it was just like, oh, and then it was out, and then it was out there. And I came across Susie Walker's Substack, and it may be that I read an article from her in the paper that I can't quite remember, but I came across her very early on. And that was really fortuitous because then I joined her writing group, which meets every Tuesday and Thursday morning. And so instantly I had something kind of bringing me to the table, Substacks to talk about. And while we're there, sometimes I write Substack pieces, sometimes I write my book. But actually, normally in that group, I do write my Substacks and use that forum because we've all got a publication on there. And obviously through that, I met you. And I started writing regularly right from the off.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. So it's like that arrival, isn't it? And that permission slip, once something is relatively easy to wrap your head around. And obviously, Substack have rolled out a lot of new features in the
Yeah,
last
yeah,
year. Like,
yeah.
let's be realistic, a year ago it was a different place, but the features are meant to help enhance our publication experience. I strongly believe that, and we can use the
Yeah.
ones we want and disregard the ones that we don't
Yeah.
need to. Ultimately, we can publish a newsletter on there or a blog, however we want to look at it, and we can reach people and we can communicate and we can have chats in the comments and all of that lovely stuff.
Yeah, and that's it. It's all about connection for me. And very early on, it's funny. It's a bit like with my book when I was kind of people ask you me to define it, and I find myself describing it in different ways, like women and water, or grief, or it's this, or it's connection with nature. It's lots of things in one thing. And my Substack's kind of the same. My Substack's called Lemon Soul, and my tagline is a bit like is refreshing perspectives and slices of life because I don't write in a category. And I think that's another beauty of it is that you don't have to. And yes, there are people who write very specifically in categories. It could be parenting or crafting or politics or the US election, or it could be whatever. So people do have very specific niches. And I think that's great. So it really supports that. But I also think I just like to kind of write about life and observations and connections and make it very, very human. And when I in my bio, when we sort of do this, like, how do you describe your Substack? I thought, well, I use words that other readers have said about my writing. So rather than me sort of think, how would I describe it to you? I sort of thought, well, I'm just going to use words that people have commented on mine, and they've sort of said highly relatable, profoundly human. And I'm like, great.
There we go.
I
Yeah.
love because it's like I want people, and that's the feedback I get from people. Is like they read it and they're like, oh my God, those are the things that I think. I didn't know that other people thought that, or those are the things I experience. Whether it is about, I do have kids, teenagers. So there are some things on parenting, but I don't write loads on parenting, but that's a feature of me and my life and my experience. Or it could be about my former world. There could be a bit about, there was one piece I wrote about air traffic control, but I was thinking about that when I was in the lake when a load of geese came into land, and I wrote this whole piece about clear to land for the geese and clearing the waterway for people. So it's just things that amuse and make me laugh and kind of life observations because we all sit there thinking we're all a bit nuts and nobody else thinks like us, but then you kind of read something and you're like, okay, I'm not alone.
And get those points of connection, yeah, for sure. And I think we've got a really warm audience on Substack. Like I felt like that from the off. Like and I don't think I'm alone in this. I know it can be harder for people starting now, but it doesn't take long before, you join a few communities, whether that's paid or not, as long as you put some energy into meeting people and connections, you can feel really connected and really supported in your work, can't you? Really witnessed.
Yeah, you really can. I'm interested as to why you think it's harder now to start.
Just because members are saying that, to be honest. So, it'll just be sort of one or two a week where people are like, I feel like I'm doing all the things and I'm not really sure about this. And I think it's to do with the amount of things that are possible to do. So, showing up on notes. So, notes, only was brought in last April. So, there's one thing that obviously we didn't necessarily have to get our heads round straight at the beginning. And then it just was all quite fun. Whereas now it can still be fun, but it's like you go there and you think, oh, well, I should be doing this. Should I do one like this? It's just the way social media affects behavior, isn't it? And then I guess when people are starting to publish, they want that kind of one or two people witnessing what they do. and they're sort of building up from scratch in a way that feels uncomfortable, because it's like, am I doing something wrong? And it's like, you're not doing anything wrong. It just takes a little bit of time for you to meet others in the community and kind of connect with others, collaborate, find your right people, all that sort of thing. I remember people would say that about Instagram, and I never got it. I didn't find my right people on Instagram, not really. I'd sort of had a nice time there, sort of chatted about the work projects that I had, shared quite a bit about motherhood, which then felt a little bit better. But Substack has been my place really for connection and for being of service. Like, that's what Sparkle is. It's an act of service. So yeah, quite a complicated answer there, I think, Emma, but I think it is that thing of going, is it okay if it's not being read, or if it's only being read by 50 people or 100 people? It's like, of course it is. That's a
Yeah,
wonderful thing.
exactly, which is why your Substack is so great, because it is that slow, soulful growth. And we all get sucked into it. And I think I sort of try and say it to myself, and I say to anyone else, come back to like, why are you on here? What brought you to here in the first place? And mine is to connect with people. Yes, I mean, we all think, did I come on here to have X thousand subscribers? No, actually, I didn't. That was never, I didn't
Mm.
even think about that. I thought, am I going to get two? But then inevitably, as you start to get more, then you kind of get sucked into this. Oh, well, what if I get more? What if I hit this milestone, or I hit that milestone? So, I think there are people that can massively support you through that, like yourself. But also, it's like you say, there are so many things. You do find your way, and it's like, oh, there's a podcast, I should do a podcast. It's like, okay, no, I don't have the brain space for a podcast. I'm not doing
Yeah.
video, and then it's like, oh, there's a voiceover capability, so I should voice record everything I write, but that takes quite a lot of time. So I kind of let myself off. I think there's a lot of
Mm.
that. It's like I write, and also because of my health conditions, if I'm like pretty well, which I am today, then great, I can write. But when I'm not well, I can't write. So I have to also keep Substack as a place that serves me, as well as,
Mm.
connecting with the audience. It's got to also be right for you. And I think what's great about it is that it does allow that. I don't find it like social media. I guess it is in a sense, but I don't find it in any way like any of the other platforms.
It's so true. I think, and for me, there's definitely been a shift, turning up to write quite cathartically, to then, educating a bit about my Stay Creative on Substack message, to then starting a whole new publication for that, becoming a Substack bestseller, all of
Mm.
that. And now I feel like my priority every week, is to show up in service. And then after I've done that, midweek, I'm like, what do I want to write? Like, that's the question I'll ask myself on a Wednesday. What do I want to write? So it's really interesting that we can bring these different parts of ourselves to a platform. We're not used to that. It's like, oh, we get to write, we get to join communities, we get to comment, we get to chat, we get to read. There's so much to it, isn't there? It can be quite complicated, and we're all having a different experience on there.
Yeah, we are. And I think it all comes back to, yeah, like you say, even with my book, it's like, what did you do? What did I want out of this book? And, coming back to sort of your first question about how I started the structure in that, before I even got my agent, I did Beth Kempton's book proposal masterclass. Now, Beth is incredible on here, and in her books.
We
And
love Beth.
I love Beth. So I did her book proposal masterclass twice. First time was actually a book idea, which is not this one at all. It was another book idea, which is sitting under my desk dormant, which may resurface. But I think a lot of the questions that I was asked right back then when I was sort of putting together the book proposal is like, you get the classic things that, who's it for? When's the right time? Why are you the right person to write it? And all those kind of things. But actually, one thing I come back to is, why am I doing this in the first place? And it was never as a financially motivated move, that's for sure.
Mm,
Um, I think my driving force always is that if by reading my words in the book or on Substack or on Facebook or wherever, one person feels less alone, then that's what I wanted to achieve.
mm,
That's my thing. So
mm,
with the book, I can keep thinking, it's like, what were your aspirations? This is before I even knew it was going to be published, which comes back to your intro as well.
mhm,
I did not have a publisher.
mhm,
At that point, I was preparing to self-publish very happily.
mm,
I was hoping that my agent would secure a book deal, because that would be amazing, because that's what we're all taught to expect is amazing. And yeah, God knows I did want that. Of course I did. Um, but it didn't look like that was going to happen. So it's like, right, I'm going to self-publish. And it's like, well, I'll keep coming back to the core of it. It's not about being a Sunday Times bestseller. It's not about selling thousands of copies. Of course, those things would be nice. I'm not going to pretend they wouldn't. Of course they would. But that's not, I wanted to get my words out in the world so that the people who need to read them find them.
Mhm.
You know, and the people that are in those moments of grief or loss of connection or just like flailing in the world, if they read something that gives them something to anchor onto, I'm like, that is why I'm doing it. That is what it's all about. And that would have been whether I self-published or got the book deal, and then, you know, and then the rest will be will be. And, you know, I'm very philosophical in life now, which is partly about being older. I'm in my 50s. Partly about, you know, the more losses you weather, the more philosophical I think you get once you kind of can come up for air again.
Mm.
About what your intentions are and what you're doing it all for. So it's kind of the same theory with Substack. And, you know, nothing is better for me than if I get a message from someone saying, oh my God, I read this and it made me cry in a good way. Or, you know,
Mm.
I
Mhm.
really needed that today, or thank you, I feel less alone. You know, that's
Mhm.
what it's for. And if I get a like, oh, you've got 1,000 subscribers. I mean, I haven't, but you know, if you get this, it's be like, oh, that's great. That gives a bit of validation because we're very conditioned to be externally validated in our society, aren't we? But it's really the other stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it's so beautiful to hear you speak about that, Emma. And also, there's real clarity in that. Like, there's real clarity in you waking up and deciding, in that purposeful way that we all want, like, what is my purpose today? What am I doing and why? And like, that. And I think a lot of people want that, like they want that clarity. And I do, I'm a massive fan of self-development. We've chatted about this before. I'm a massive fan of Beth Kempton. When she did Winter Writing Sanctuary last year, that was the first year I'd had energy to plug in. So I've signed up, 2-3 years before, just watched the emails come in, not done anything with them. Last year I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get up early before the kids wake up. And there's one, and I think you'll remember and relate, where she takes you through a sort of a visualization about meeting your book on a shelf in somewhere, a store, and what happens with that. And it was a profoundly powerful visualization to just allow yourself to go into that space. And I think sometimes, we want to tell ourselves, oh, but it doesn't matter, but it doesn't matter. But actually, those feelings, like, that's the human experience, isn't it? Like feeling really chuffed if you get 1,000 subscribers, or if your book ends up on, whatever, Waterston, in the window in Waterstones or whatever, like those lovely things. And I know you just had one just recently where you'd screenshotted and said, was it like #1 on Amazon, like recommended to pre-order or something? What was it, Emma?
It was hot new releases.
Hot
Hot new
new
releases.
releases. She's a hot new release, this lady. I
I
love
know.
it.
So for what I'm saying about, you know, what's important, yes, of course, external validation still gives you such a boost because that is how we exist and how we live. And it was somebody I've connected with on Instagram, an author called Jo Mosley, who writes beautiful stuff. She's a stand-up paddleboarder. And we've connected on Insta. And she just messaged me to say, oh my God, congratulations. You're #1 on Amazon's hot new releases. And I was like, what? How? And she said she was looking for a gift book, a swimmy gift book for a friend.
Mm,
She Googled that on Amazon, and that became my name. So I then went and Googled the same and couldn't find myself anywhere. And so I said,
okay.
oh my God, where did you find that? And she sent me the link and it was hilarious. I mean, I found it hilarious. I was like, my book's not even out yet. And it was showing #1 on Amazon hot new releases in my category.
Mm.
And yeah, and then down below it at #3 was Lorraine Kelly. So my
Oh, there
friend,
she is.
I know my friend who was with me was like, "Oh my God, Em, you're hotter than Lorraine Kelly," and I was like, "Oh my God,
Oh, that is very
what
cool. That is very, very
But
cool.
no, love Lorraine Kelly. But you know, it
Well,
was
maybe
like,
you and Lorraine should have a chat. You
oh,
could
I
go
would
on,
love
Lorraine.
to.
Go
I'd
and meet
love
Lorraine.
to.
Tell her about wild swimming. I think she'd be really keen
Amazing.
on all of that. She'd be
So
so
she's
she'd be
written,
so lovely. She'd make you a cup
yeah,
of tea and ask you all about it, wouldn't she, lovely Lorraine?
exactly. Exactly. But I mean, this is the weird way of the world, though. So she was down at #3 with like 3,000 5-star reviews, and she's Lorraine Kelly, and you know, her book is out, and I was at #1. And my book isn't out till March, and I've got no reviews on Amazon because you're not allowed to review it till it's out. So, I mean, God only knows how that worked. But yeah, that was a moment of just like
Mm.
elation. And so, yes, those things are great. But I think it, without sounding like, you know, I'm sort of like doing the Tower of Pooh or something like that. I think if I'd strove
One of
for
them.
that outcome, I don't think that would have happened. I
Mm-hmm.
was just writing it in the way that I do. And then somebody told me that that had happened. I don't, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? It's like, yeah, but it's horses for courses in what
Mm.
people see as their validation and achievements and successes and things like that. So no, I was utterly delighted with that, but it wasn't something I knew about or I intended to get or I worked towards.
Mm.
Outcome of writing and networking and connecting. And I think that's one of the things that I really love doing. And Substack is so good for this. And like communities like yours, Claire, you know, I met you through Susie, and then I've met other friends, you know, through you, and we've met in person quite a few times now. And then, you know, but then there's people that you've connected me with and things like that. And those are the things that also come home to roost, because then those people get to know you and you're rooting for them and they're rooting for you. And, you know, I'll spot something that you've done and I'm like, you know, you've had this amazing book that you've just come out and launched through Kickstarter with Russell. And so it's like, oh, yay, so I'm buying that book, you know what I mean? And then bringing people into that. And so you suddenly realize there's this whole kind of collective support group. And then somebody's messaging me to say they've seen my book as #1 on this bestseller, on this hot new releases list. And I would never have found that without the community. And that's part of it.
It's really true. And I've just been in this beautiful 10-week container with a writer. She's not actually on Substack currently, but she's called Cat River, and she approaches
Oh,
business from a mother-centric perspective. So I've just done her 10-week container, and early on in the container, she was talking about evidence stacking for the things that feel important in life and business, like seeing those things come and like giving them a moment to recognize them, you know, going, oh, look at that. And I know you'd sent the screenshot to me, and that is the moment. That's the moment of kind of seeing it and going, oh, okay. Because otherwise, like our nervous systems, you know, they love to keep us safe. And especially with chronic health or when you're managing a really full life, when you've got kids, like any of these things, like we want to stay safe. We don't want to put ourselves out there too much. It's scary. We have to a little bit. And it's this dance all the time. And having gone through that very, very exposing book launch period, as you know, I want to teach a class on how I managed to do that, right? Because I learned so much through that period, but I also have healed quite a lot from kind of being like petrified to do presentations. So I want to track all that back through and kind of present that out to the world, because I think, you know, it's almost like a muscle we can use, but we don't know how to even start flexing it because it's terrifying. You know, it's like, oh, I've got a book out and I've got to talk about it. And then how do I answer all the questions on it? So coming together at like book festivals like we did, like Anik, and I know you've been to one this weekend, and hearing you speak. So I've heard Emma speak because she taught a masterclass in Susie's community. So if you join Susie's community, you'll be able to get this masterclass. It's one of the best masterclasses I've ever been to. And I said to Emma afterwards, she was like, really? And I was like, honestly, it was packed full of value, really practical, really encouraging. And also, you said something, and I think this is really profound. You said, I just treated it like a job. You know, I had my book. When I would go somewhere, I would tell people, here's a copy of this, or like whatever it was. You know, it was like, I've got a book coming out. And it just sort of felt like, oh yeah, like it's not going to happen if we don't put ourselves out there. So when these opportunities arise, or where we've booked a festival ticket or a, you know, a literary festival ticket, there's an opportunity there for us to get
yeah.
those evidence stacking pieces that help us to go, I can do this. You know, I'm going to sell my book. It's going to be, you know, on Amazon's list or whatever else it is. I'm going to get to 1,000 Substack subscribers.
Yeah, I think that is really important that you sort of bring that into perspective, because yeah, I don't want to sort of make out like, oh, I just write lovely stuff and the rest happens by magic, because it's not like that at all. In that I work bloody hard, but I work really hard because I'm really passionate about the book and about what I write. So, you know, and for me, it's also about knowing your skills, right? So I know that I'm not great at marketing. I don't really like social media. I mean, I like it for connecting with people.
Mm,
I really don't like sort of like, you know, creating grids and doing all that stuff. It's just not something that comes easily to me. But what I do love is talking to people. So I found out that I love PR. I'm happy presenting, I'm happy talking, I'm happy going out and chatting. So I play to my strengths in that. And, you know, when I go around book festivals, part of it is just like, because I'm a fangirl, right? And so there's loads of authors and I surround myself with books and there's loads of people I love. And I'm like so excited because I go to see, you know, this person and that person and I get the book signed. But then also I was like, okay, I'm also trying to get into this world, and maybe would you maybe have a look at my book? Would you maybe review this, or would you maybe look at that? And I found the community, like in Substack, to be unfaultingly generous. I'm literally writing a piece about this today on my Substack.
Oh.
And my masterclass is also on my Substack as
Oh,
well.
is it? Oh,
So
great.
yeah,
So people can get it
yeah,
on yours.
yeah.
I do think, it is such a gift, that masterclass, to people. I just think everybody who is writing on Substack and or wants to write a book in the world, I just think it's so helpful, and especially because you're so, breathtakingly honest about where you are on your journey when you delivered that. I just loved it. Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah, and it was coming back to that, like you sort of alluded to, books are a business. And again,
Mm.
it's coming up in today's piece, books are a business. The only person who's really interested in your words in that way, and the love of it during that process is kind of is you and your readers, right? The rest of the extraneous and necessary people in the mechanics are there for the business. So you've got to think about that. It's like, will the book sell? How do I get it there? Who can I ask to support me in this process? And I was at an incredible memoir writing day last week with Clover Stroud, and I
Oh,
mean,
yeah,
fan
lovely
of her.
Clover.
Yeah, she was amazing. Big fan of hers and her work, and she writes so honestly about life. And her thing is called "The Way Life Feels" and grief and everything. And at the end, I felt a bit like, oh God, I was like, might you review my book? Could I get my publisher to send you an advance copy? And she was like, yes, of course. And she said, we've all had to ask. And she was so lovely. And most of the experiences I have are so lovely. And sometimes people will say, I'd love to, but I haven't got time. That's fine. We're all really, really busy. But I think for me, sort of, again, making those connections and saying, would you help me? Would you maybe look at this? Maybe would you have a proofread, or would you give me some thoughts on this? We're conditioned to want to help each other within
Yeah.
whatever time and availability we have. It's that's another part of the human condition. So it's being savvy about it as well. Whilst I haven't got a background in writing, I have got a corporate background, so I am business savvy. So
Yeah.
I do carry that with me, in terms of, like, yes, I want the book to be, well, how do we define success? But I wanted it to get traditionally published. I did want that to happen. I mean, that's probably a whole other conversation in itself about why that was important to me. But yeah, and so I do want to see it in Waterstones. It's currently on the Waterstones website. I want to see it in the Waterstones shop. I mean, I'd love to see it here, and I just, yeah, I'd love to see what people think of it when it's out.
No, and I do think we will see that. I think, having seen the proof cover, so I don't know whether this will be the actual cover, but I think it'll be pretty close. I feel like it is the type of book that you see in a window, because it's just got that look about it. And I feel like, obviously, the title and the way they've combined all of those visuals, it is just an attractive book that you would want to pick up. And it also kind of says what it is from the off, right? So I think sometimes, I was in WH Smith yesterday in St Pancras Station in London, and there's this really interesting thing that happens where it's like, what section do I want to be in? Like, what am I here to buy? Like, what do I want? I've got a
Yeah, yeah,
3 hour
yeah.
train journey home. Like, what do I want to buy? I can feel like if your book was there, I would have been like, this one. This is what, it wasn't, because it's not out yet. But, you can feel like you can connect to that. And I feel like, especially, it's been really interesting actually, because being at my friend's book launch last week, and I had never thought about this. This is my naivety in the industry, but she'd had a meeting with a PR agency about what was trending. And I was like, oh. So her book's called How to Divorce Sober. It's by Hannah
Yes,
Harvey.
yeah. I saw you wrote about that on Instagram.
It's a great
Yeah,
book. I've just
looks
read it.
amazing.
But
Yeah.
when she said about sobriety trending, I was like, oh, this is really savvy. Like, I just was like, she's written the book she wants to write, because I know her, right? So I know that this book's really important to her. But there's a whole load of other things gone on there that if I hadn't have gone to that book launch, that just hadn't come up in conversation. So there's something, isn't there, about treating this book idea, this passion, and then combining it with a set of people who are running a business. Agents are running a business, publishers are running a business. They want your book to sell, of course they do, but they also want it to be, they want to be sure enough about it, don't they, to take a risk. And I know, there's lots of conversation, and Beth Kempton talks about this, where, you don't have to have that huge social media following. I wondered if we could talk about how that had been for you, Emma, when you were writing that book proposal and sending it out, and, securing your agent and then getting the publisher to kind of come along with it. Like, how has that felt for you? Did that all feel okay? Was it hard? Like, tell us more about that.
Do you mean with respect to social media or just in
Just
general?
that proposal. So in the back of people's minds, lots of them aren't even trying because they're like, well, I haven't got 20,000 on Instagram, or I
Yeah,
haven't got a
okay,
bit,
okay.
a big profile. So what's the point? But I
Yeah,
know
no,
that you haven't had those big numbers. You haven't gone with that angle, if you like.
no,
So I'd
I
love to just
haven't.
hear more about it.
Yeah, no, I haven't at all. And again, what I'm writing about today is I've got a piece on it today, just saying, what you don't need, in my view, to be a writer, and what you do need. And it's like you don't need a massive social media following. I'm not saying these things don't help. You don't need a massive social media following. You don't need to have a background in necessarily in journalism or copywriting. You don't need to be high profile. You don't need to have a writing room. You don't need, but the things that you do need: interest, courage, the ability to kind of look at the world with inquisitive eyes and notice things around you. And you do need a support network. But so I'm writing very much on that today because I came into this at the age of 48 with, I think, 800 Instagram followers. So that's never going to be much more than that. And it's been static at that for several years, with no background in writing, with health problems, with, you know, no experience, no masters in creative writing or anything like that, and just sort of went through the process. And now I've got a book deal, and I'm Emerson's hot new release, and but my book's coming out, and all these things are happening. So what I'm trying to kind of what I sort of try and write about here as well on Substack is about I'm just really, really kind of normal in as much as any of us are normal, but um, and so coming into the process, what I did to get the agent was I went through an organization that I'm a member of called Bite the Book, which is BYTE, the book, Bite the Book, set up by a woman called Justine Solomons. And it's amazing. And it's about connecting writers with the publishing industry in whichever way that may happen, whether you self-publish or go direct or go through an agent. And they run a thing called an agent's table where you do pay like for time. And I had my book proposal that I'd done with Beth, which was like 80 pages, really thorough, really
80
thorough.
pages, is that how long a book proposal is?
Yeah, like
Wow,
it's
I had no idea.
massive.
Mm,
PR, marketing,
wow.
and that's including chapter samples and stuff. But
Hmm.
there's like a lot of stuff in there. I mean, her masterclass is extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's so in depth. But you've got your comparable titles, you've got your peers and competitors, you've got market analysis, all so much stuff in there. So yeah,
Wow.
there's a
Okay.
huge grounding to that. But when I went to the agents table, they didn't want anything of that depth. That's the sort of thing you would send to query an agent. A non-fiction. This is for non-fiction. For fiction, you need to have the entire manuscript, but for non-fiction, you don't need to have written the book, but you need to have a solid proposal, which is all those things about why you're best placed to write it, why now is the good time, where it will sit in the market, why it will sell, how you'll market it, and things like your social media figures would go into that. Um, but when I did the Bite the Book thing, what happens is you get to send in like a mini proposal or just a synopsis or précis. And I think I sent in maybe 2 sample chapters. Um, and it's much, much smaller. And you get feedback from an agent, from 2 agents, and you get 15 minutes with each. And the reason I did that is because I had identified some agents I wanted to query with my big proposal. And I thought, right, well, before that, I just want to get my proposal in the best possible shape. So I'm going to do this process and get 2 agents to just say, yeah, we like the idea, or we don't like the idea, or do this. Anyway, it was a couple of years ago, and it was online. It was like this. It was a bit like I say, it's either like speed dating or online parents' evening, depending what demographic of life you're in, where
Hmm.
you suddenly go into a room, and I was with this agent, and we were on a screen like this, and she just was like, "Oh my God, I love your book. I love your writing. I love the concept of it." This is before I'd gone to then meet the head of the agency at the Ivy and all this. This is who became my agent, but right from the start she was very effusive about it, and this is how we can represent you, and this is what we'll offer you, and blah blah blah, and I want to work with you. And then she was gone, and I was like, what just happened, seriously. And then the next minute I was in the room with another agent who was another woman, and she said, I love your writing sublime, but your social media following isn't strong enough. I want you to go away and work on that for 2 months and then come back to me. So basically, I won't consider you till you've grown your social media following. So, kind of to answer your question, one didn't mention it, one said, go away and work on it. And I came away from that and I was like, my head was reeling. It was like, I don't really know what happened. I connected better with the first person anyway. And she offered to represent me, and then I had a moment of like, oh, first person I've spoken to wants to represent me, maybe I should go and speak to some other people, and I had that whole thought process about what's right for me, and do I then go to the agent I was originally going to query. But actually I had such a great connection with this agent, and then met the head of the agency, and he's Irish and my family are Irish, and I kind of loved all that side of it. And when we had that conversation where he got it down to the nub of it being about my brother's death and not actually about open water per se, I thought, right, these are people I want to work with. So that's how that came about. And my social media didn't matter at all. Then the next stage of the process is them pitching to publishing houses. So then the question comes up again, because obviously if I had 100,000 followers on Instagram, a publishing house would be much more open to accepting a manuscript, because there was a lot against me. It falls under memoir, okay? Really, it's called sort of memoir led. It's not a strict memoir, but it is a lot of vignettes of my life around significant moments: my brother's death, the birth of my daughter. There's a beautiful chapter about water births. So that one isn't necessarily about the open water, but the fundamental relationship we have with water as women. So yeah, what was I saying?
We're just on the train to get the publisher, so how that then connected to the agents approaching the publisher
Oh,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
waiting for that coming through. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, that's my current stage of life, is that thoughts just disappear out of my
No,
head.
that's okay. That's all right. I'll keep you on track. I'm fascinated.
Yeah, so then when they were approaching the publishing houses, it was just like, okay, my 800 followers on Instagram is obviously not worth mentioning in that scheme. So, the big five didn't pick me up. Oh, that's what I was saying. Yeah, it's memoir. So memoir is a notoriously tough category to be noticed in or to be published in. And, when you go into Waterstones, a lot of them are by famous people, celebrities, or someone with something really extraordinary to say, who's had some like extraordinary event. Mine doesn't really fit into either of those categories. I haven't climbed Everest and kind of writing about it, and I'm not famous. So it was a really difficult sell. But my agent really believed in it. And, the big five publishing houses didn't pick it up. And I think it was based on that. It was like, memoirs are really hard sell, and she's not well known enough, is kind of the basic bottom line. But then just as I was about to self-publish, when I thought this isn't going to go that way, and that's absolutely fine, and I was 100% fine with it. There's some brilliant people that I know and connect on here, like Sue Reed, who's also in Susie's group, who's self-published very successfully. Then my agent got a call from an independent publisher called Icon Books, who is my publisher. I haven't mentioned my book's name yet, actually. It's called Breaking Waves. I should probably say that several times. See, this is why marketing. It's called Breaking Waves. Yeah, so then my agent called me just when we were probably about to almost part ways because the book wasn't selling, and said, "You've got a book deal." And that was it. And then suddenly, from thinking that I was going to pay out to get my book published, which I would, whether I, partnership publishing or whichever way I was going to do it, I was being paid. I was being paid. I got an advance for my manuscript. I then had an editor. I had a publicist. Then suddenly this whole machine kind of became part of my support and part of my family. And they didn't equally, they have never really had a conversation with me about social media. They're like, yeah, put it on your socials, but we'll help you with that. We'll support you. We'll do what we can. They're not massive, but they're not tiny. So for me, it's never really mattered. And that's a godsend, because I wouldn't get published on the strength of my social media. And I thought at several moments, do I just make that my job for a while? Like, right, pour myself to Instagram for 6 months. And I decided no, because my soul would just die a little bit. And it's just not for me. And I thought, if that's what I need to do, that's not right for me.
So brilliant, Emma. And I know everybody's publishing journey will be different, but I know it has inspired me at multiple points along knowing you, this last year. I do think it is very, very inspiring if someone has a book dream, to hear your story, to hear this story, to hear how true to the story that you wanted to tell you've stayed. And then that last minute, like, okay, like the publisher's picking it up. So we're in that window now. The book is on pre-order. So There's been that moment of going, okay, the book is on pre-order. We're sharing the link. The link obviously will below this podcast, wherever you get in the podcast, wherever you listen, you'll be able to get that link. And then it'll go out into the world and you'll be in a different phase. So we'll see how that all goes. And your Substack will be running alongside all of that as well.
Yeah, it will. And I love writing on Substack. And it's almost just because I can't not, I actually just love writing. And that's
Mm,
what it comes back to. Um, Publication in itself is incredible. Um, but I think it's not to get sucked into that that's the everything because, you know, I feel, and it's almost the language that we use, like I feel very lucky to be published. I'm very grateful. We're still very like submissive in that kind of way. Do you know what I mean? Instead of being like, well, I've written something and it's good enough, it's still this kind of like the power dynamic within the industry is quite an interesting one.
mm,
Um, and I just keep going back to writing because I love writing and writing, like I said before, because if one person connects to it, then that's incredible. But the rest of it, I mean, it's brilliant fun. And where I met you, I think was the first time we met in person at the Annick
mhm.
Story Fest last year. I think I'm going to be talking at it next year, so that's incredible. So, like, I've gone from being
Yay!
somebody that queues up. I mean, like, so then I got gone from somebody who queues up to see an author and chats to them and gets their book signed to being the person who's doing the book signing. I mean, that's insane.
Mm,
Um, but these things can happen, and
yeah.
it comes back to what's it for? Is it going to make me millions? No, of course it's not. But that's not why I'm in it. I mean, just to be that and connect with readers and to speak to people, to have someone. I mean, God, the thought of having somebody come up to me and say, oh, I really like this bit, or I mean, that would just be the most incredible thing. And I remember my best friend saying that to me when I was sending her pictures of Anik and other festivals I've been to prior to that. And I was like, oh my God, I met so and so, and I met this person. And she's like, that's going to be you one day. And I was like, of
Mm,
course, it's not going to be me. But then kind of I'm like, oh God, maybe it is,
it is, yeah, it's happening.
enjoy that. I
It,
mean,
yeah, and it is really special. It's really special to be in those positions of doing the talks, meeting the readers, meeting the people who want to listen to what you've got to say, because you've been in a place where you've been on the other side, and I think somehow there's something in the process is obviously quite new for me as well. There's something in having been on the other side, having been in events organization, having been on the bit where I just supported everyone artistically as a creative producer my whole career, to then people going, like quoting my book, like with Russell. It's like, oh yeah, or not even my book. Like sometimes people will just quote things that I've said, and I'm like, did I say that? It's like it's lovely, but obviously it's because we found the thing that we want to share. We're called to share a thing in the world, and I think sometimes that just takes time. Whatever that is, whatever those lines are that people then want to quote back to you, like that for some people will be, the pop stars in their 20s, and for others like us will be, in our 40s and 50s, and that'll be the time where people are like, this is some wisdom or some
yeah,
connection that I want, and that's nice.
exactly. And I mean, from your perspective, I mean, I've seen Sparkle from inception,
Mm,
what it is now, because when we met, you didn't have Sparkle.
no.
And Sparkle is phenomenal. And then people are like, oh my God, Claire Venus. It's like you're famous. And what you've done in that world it's so incredible and inspiring to watch. But like you say, it's because your heart's in it. It's your soul. It's what you know. It's your passion. And that's how it works.
And
And it's
that's how it works, yeah. But
yeah,
and I hope that this has inspired lots of people to think about that more deeply, because there's definitely something in spending time with that, like you did in Beth's masterclasses twice, right? Like those book proposal masterclasses, like being in those worlds where you can be like, what is it? Like, what is it? Like, I'm nearly there. It's something. I'm just not quite. I do think there is something in getting clarity and spending time and getting clarity. And we can do that through the creative process for sure. We can give ourselves time, but we can also connect with people who have found that clarity and see if that resonates or kind of connects for us as well.
yeah, definitely. And also just keep being kind to yourself, because if that doesn't come, then don't just give up. It's another thing I've
Mm,
today. It's like we put so many barriers in our way of why we shouldn't write, or why we're not good enough, or why, there's the whole personal side of it of why I'm not good enough, or we're very apologetic about ourselves a lot of the time, particularly women. or why we can't do it on a practical level, or all these kind of things. And it's like, yeah, but you can, but you really, really can. And if you don't get that clarity straight away, don't give up either, because I went through that book proposal process twice, and then when I met the agent, it whole completely changed again. And then when I got edited by my publisher, so much stuff, 10,000 words got removed from my book, like of 75,000. There wasn't that much in it in the first place. It wasn't a long.
Mm.
So it keeps going through iterations and iterations. And I'm going through the same book process now on my second book. I've got another 3 book ideas. I'm really struggling with which one to take forward right now. I'm loving all of them, but then I sort of thought I had real clarity on one. And actually, when I was at Clover's memoir writing day, in a good way, that kind of disintegrated. And I thought, oh shit, it's not what I thought it was going to be, but actually
Mm.
good. It's like, it's okay. So I think it's also being kind about the expectations we set on ourselves, that like, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that masterclass and then I'm going to know. You might do, but if you don't know, that's also okay, because you would have learned so much and that will all come good.
That's so true. Again, in Kat's program, and I think you'll really like this, Emma. So she talked to us about the individual muses on the individual creative projects. So because I'm like you, I'm quite multi-hyphen and I have a lot of things going on at once, not only for like income streams and feeling safe and secure in my business, but because I'm genuinely passionate about lots of things. So
Yeah,
in connecting to the muse for a particular book or a particular creative project, it's super interesting. So when I connected to the muse on Russell and my book, so I was in the middle of promoting it at this point, and I was like, this is a whole entity that is outside of me that has things, wisdom to share with me about the book. So it's a visualization exercise, right? So if you're like listening, being like, what, you've got to meet a muse? What? No, like it's
yeah,
visual, it's
what's
visual.
that
So
mean? Yeah,
yeah. And then from that kind of position of getting more secure with what it is, the timeline, the shape, all of that stuff, that there are intimate, infinite possibilities with all of that. It's just wild how many different ways we could approach the same creative idea.
yeah,
But when we get this connection with the muse, it's like, oh, this is what's being asked to be born. Elizabeth Gilbert writes about it as well. And I do think there's something that we can step into that is maybe, it's a bold shout, we're going to go otherworldly, we're going to go universal, but why not give it a try? So if you're open to that sort of visualization exercise and kind of connecting to what could be possible, maybe that's something for people listening that they could connect in with if they're trying to help themselves with decision making.
yeah, definitely. And just one thing briefly that ties into that I read this morning, which really inspired me, on this book Bird by Anne Lamott, which is yeah, has been around I think for about 20
Yeah, I've
years.
heard of that one. Yeah.
Quite extraordinary. There were bits of it that is, of its time, but also, there's something she wrote in it this morning that, no, she didn't write, that I read this morning. And it was really around the fact that it's not, when we say things like we've got writer's block or we're putting up these boundaries, that it's not actually a block, but that what it is an emptiness. And I love that. And she's like, so, you talk about your muse. It's like, okay, allow that emptiness and then go and find something to fill it. So, for you, it could be what, like, sort of things you've just talked about in this
Mhm.
kind of universal way. But it could be, instead of it thinking, oh, I can't write, or I can't do this, or barriers, 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 it's like, okay, take the emptiness that's actually there and go for a walk in the park, or go to an art gallery, or sit in a library, or read a book, or watch a film. It doesn't have to be some big kind of like, right, I have to go and have some, go down to the sea. But you can. I mean, for me, water is fundamental in kickstarting the creative process. Every time I get into the lake, whether it's warm or cold, I come out bursting with ideas. It really does fundamentally. I guess that's kind of like my muse. But I love that. I think that feels like a similar concept of just being open, being empty and open, and allowing something in to start that creative process.
I love that. And the reason I drew on that is because I've had a few messages recently from people that are just really stuck in overthinking. And I wanted to offer more in the way of moving through, keeping the energy going, allowing rest as well, because it's really important.
Yeah.
Rest is a cyclical rest, seasonal rest, all of it is important. Sometimes we will be just called to rest, and out of that rest, things blossom, you know. It's
Yeah,
just that, it's that age-old thing, isn't it? Like autumn and winter are purposeful. You know, it's not just everything dying back. It is that, but it's also everything taking time to recharge. So yeah, well,
yeah.
it's been beautiful, Emma. It's lovely to hear more about behind the scenes of your book. So it's called Breaking Waves. It's available on pre-order. You can pre-order it on Waterstones, I know, but can we pre-order it other places now?
Yeah, it's on Amazon, and Foils, and
Hmm.
quite possibly other places, but I keep being informed of that by other people.
Yeah, well, it was really cool because when I went to my local bookshop, I asked to pre-order it there, and she couldn't do it, and she was like, "I'm going to sort that out." So then I'm in town again next week. I'll go in and I'll see if I can pre-order
Oh,
it there. So I'll let you know whether it's she's
do let
managed
me
to get it
know.
on. I know it's exciting. So
Yeah.
yeah, so people can follow along with your journey on Instagram, and you have Substack as well. Could you let us know the handles for those if you know them off the top of your head?
Yeah, I do. So I'm Emma Simpson author really everywhere. So at Emma Simpson author on Instagram. My website is emmaSimpsonauthor.com, and my Substack, I think I'm just Emma Simpson on there, but it's Lemon Soul is my publication. And within Lemon Soul, I have a series called the Book Deal Diaries. So if people wanted to know more specifically about the book deal process and the things I talked about in more detail and the masterclass you talked about, that's all in my Book Deal Diaries section under Lemon Soul. But generally under there is just all the writing and the ways that I connect with people, and just sort of say to people, there's always a space on my sofa. Come and grab a cup of tea.
Oh,
Enjoy.
beautiful. I love that. Thank you, Emma. Thanks for being here. I'll chat to you really soon.
All right, lovely. Thanks, Claire.
Bye.